Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here on the deep dive. You're here because you want to skip all the fluff and get right to the good stuff, right to the core of these, fascinating topics.
Exactly.
We're all about going deep and thorough here.
Absolutely.
Today we're digging into a pretty compelling piece of American history and a story that you might not be, too familiar with.
Yeah.
The story of Filipe Espinosa.
That's right. And we're working with a really great factual foundation here. It's a Wikipedia entry that's pretty detailed, and it gives us a solid, overview of his life and the events that unfolded around him. But we're not just stopping at the facts today, right?
Right.
We really want to understand who this guy was, who was Felipe Espinosa, the world that he lived in, and what his actions meant. What's the significance of all of this? And we want to have those like aha moments as we're going through this where you start to see the connections and you get a new perspective.
I love those.
Yeah.
So your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to stick with us here. And please do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As we delve into this narrative,
That's right.
the man himself, the backdrop of his life, and then just this crazy chain of events that really shook things up back then.
Exactly. And we're looking for, the surprises, the unexpected twists in the story.
Yeah.
And those sort of hidden currents of history, the things that are, below the surface
Right.
that we really want to uncover.
Okay, so let's start with the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, who was Felipe Espinosa?
Well, even his birth is a little bit shrouded in mystery.
Ooh.
Which is pretty common,
Yeah.
when you're looking at historical figures from, this period especially.
Sure.
Our sources say that he was probably born around 1827,
Okay.
and there are two possible locations. But this one is Rio Arriba County in the New Mexico Territory, which is now El Rito, New Mexico.
Okay.
And then the other possibility is that he was born further south in Veracruz, Mexico.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So he's a man of potentially, mixed origins.
In a region that's going through a lot of change at this time.
Absolutely. A time of transition.
Yeah.
For that whole region.
So we do have some family information, though, right?
We do.
Go
And that's
ahead.
always helpful, right?
Yeah, to sort of ground him a little bit.
Yeah, to give us a sense of where he came from.
Yeah.
So his parents were Pedro Ignacio Espinosa, who was born in Abicu, New Mexico,
Okay.
which is a, long-established community in the region, and Maria Gertrude Chaves.
Okay.
And he also had a brother, Jose Vivian Espinosa, and he's going to play a really important role, as we'll see
Oh, boy.
later in the story.
Yeah. It's always interesting, to get these little glimpses into someone's life before things, before the pivotal event or whatever.
Right.
What do we know about his early years and where he was living?
Well, the historical record gives us a couple of valuable snapshots.
Okay.
So the 1845 Mexican census from El Rito lists members of the Espinosa family.
Okay.
So we know that they were there in that area during, the Mexican period. And then the 1860 U.S. Census shows a Felipe Nerio Espinosa living in Conejos, which is also in present-day New Mexico, with his wife and two young children,
Okay.
a 5-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son.
Wow.
So this tells us he was a family man
Yeah.
living in the region just before
Right.
these really dramatic events of 1863.
Yeah, so that's a really stark, shift in the narrative here.
Yeah.
Because the historical record takes a really dark turn.
Yeah.
And describes this, what is known as a killing spree.
Mm-hmm.
What was the catalyst for this violence? What set this off?
Well, this is where things get really complicated.
Okay.
And, the motivations are not totally clear-cut.
Okay.
The Wikipedia entry says that there's no single definitive reason.
Okay.
But what we do know points to the U.S. Army's involvement as like a major trigger.
Okay.
It seems that they were trying to arrest Felipe and his brother Vivian for suspicion of robbery.
Okay, so were they like known bandits or something?
Well, the sources don't go into a lot of detail about that.
Oh.
It seems that that was the accusation against them.
Gotcha.
But their response to this attempted arrest had some really serious consequences.
Okay.
Yeah, when they refused to surrender, the authorities came down pretty hard.
Oh, boy.
One of their homes was burned down,
Oh, my God.
and their property was confiscated.
Wow.
And to really understand why this was such a big deal, we have to look at the broader historical context,
Okay.
specifically the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848.
Right. That's the treaty that officially ended the Mexican-American War.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it reshaped the Southwest.
It had a huge impact.
Huge impact.
Yeah, the U.S. gained a huge amount of territory, including the area where the Espinosas lived.
Mm-hmm.
And this meant that the people who were already living there, the Hispanic population, were now part of the U.S.
Right.
And what's really important to understand is that after the treaty, many of those residents had a lot of trouble holding on to their land.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The territorial courts often sided with the new white settlers who were coming in. And this led to a lot of displacement.
Yeah.
People being forced off their land and just a feeling of being, completely disenfranchised.
Yeah, it must have felt like the rug was just pulled out from under them.
Absolutely.
So you can see how this loss of land and this sense of injustice really set the stage
Yeah.
for, resentment and anger.
Exactly. It's crucial to see these events in context.
Yeah.
We can't just look at them in isolation.
Right.
So the potential loss of their home and property, combined with this bigger historical trend of, land being taken away,
Right.
that likely had a lot to do with why things escalated the way they did.
Right. Right. Yeah, because it seems like it was already, a tense situation
Yeah.
to begin with, and then
Yeah.
this happens.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. So with this backdrop of injustice and displacement in mind, this is when the killing spree starts.
that's right.
So where did this horrifying series of events begin?
Well, the rampage started in what's now Fremont County, Colorado. And in the beginning, Felipe was working with his brother Vivian.
Okay.
The first victim that we know of was found in May 1863.
Okay.
And the details are pretty disturbing.
Oh, boy.
The body had been mutilated
Oh, my God.
and the heart had been removed.
That's just horrific.
It is. It's just chilling.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder
Yeah.
about the level of rage and the intent behind it.
Yeah.
And sadly, this wasn't an isolated incident.
Right.
Over that summer, the information we have says there were about 25 more people
Oh, my God.
who were attacked and killed.
That's just...
And the way they died
Yeah.
often involved these same kinds of mutilations.
Well, that's just terrifying for the people in that region.
Absolutely would have created this widespread panic.
Yeah. Like, who's next?
Yeah, exactly.
And then, unbelievably, Filipe Espinosa actually tries to contact the authorities.
He sends a letter to John Evans, who was the territorial governor of Colorado at the time.
Wow. What was he thinking? What did he want?
Well, that's a great question, right?
What was his goal in doing that?
Yeah.
But the historical record shows that he actually laid out his demands really clearly.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty bold, actually.
So what did he want?
Okay, so he wanted pardons for himself and his gang.
Okay.
A big grant of land, 5,000 acres in Conejos County.
Wow.
And get this, he wanted appointments in the 1st Colorado Volunteer Infantry Unit.
What?
Yeah, like he wanted to be part of the very system he was fighting against.
That's wild. It's like he wants forgiveness, but he also wants power.
It's a really strange mix.
Yeah, that's so audacious.
It is.
I mean, it's almost delusional.
Yeah.
And then there's this really chilling detail about his motivation.
Right, and it's important to point out that this needs further verification.
Okay.
It's mentioned that Espinosa had a vision of the Virgin Mary,
Okay.
telling him to kill and kill again until the blood of 600 Anglos had been spilled all over New Mexico.
Wow. Okay, so we have to be careful with that.
We have to emphasize that the source material isn't totally sure about this claim.
Right. We're just presenting this as something that's been reported,
Right.
but not confirmed.
Sure.
Because if it's true, it suggests a whole other level
Yeah.
to this.
Yeah, a religious element.
Yeah, like a religiously fueled violence.
Mm-hmm.
But even without this specific vision,
Right.
the land disputes and the injustices we talked about,
Yeah,
those are already a pretty strong explanation.
absolutely. They provide a framework for understanding why he might have done this.
Right.
But whether it was just revenge or if this vision played a role too,
Yeah.
the result was the same. A lot of fear and violence
Right.
for the settlers in the area.
So what did they do to try and stop him?
Well, at first, the local law enforcement tried to catch him.
Okay.
That included the Conejos County Sheriff, Emmett Harding,
Okay.
and Commander S.B. Tappan of the 1st Colorado Volunteer Infantry Unit.
Okay.
But they couldn't find him.
That doesn't surprise me. The American West was vast and rugged back then.
Yeah, it was really hard to track someone down in that kind of terrain.
Yeah.
But eventually, a posse from Park County found their trail southwest of Cannon City, Colorado.
Okay, and did they catch up to him?
They did. There was a gunfight.
Oh, wow.
And Felipe's brother, Vivian, was killed.
Okay.
But Felipe managed to escape.
Wow, he's like a slippery guy.
He was resourceful,
Yeah.
and he knew how to survive
Yeah.
in dangerous situations.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the killing spree didn't end there.
Oh, no.
No. After hiding out for a while, Felipe came back,
Oh, gosh.
and he recruited his 14-year-old nephew, Jose.
Wow.
And together, they started killing again.
That's just heartbreaking.
It is. It shows how much influence he had over his nephew.
Yeah.
And maybe they both felt the same sense of desperation or, that need for revenge.
Right, right.
Yeah,
So this is where the legendary Tom Tobin comes in.
that's right.
Like a true Western hero.
Well, he was definitely a legend in his own time.
Yeah.
When traditional law enforcement couldn't catch Espinosa,
Mm-hmm.
the U.S. Army turned to Tom Tobin,
Okay.
who was this famous tracker in the region.
Okay, so they needed someone who knew the land.
You needed someone who could think like Espinosa.
Yeah.
And that was Tom Tobin.
Okay.
And this was a turning point in this story
Okay.
because Tobin was incredibly good at what he did.
Yeah.
In just a few days, he found their camp.
Wow.
And it all ended very quickly in a shootout. Tobin shot and killed both Felipe and Jose.
Wow, that was fast.
It was. And that brought an end to their reign of terror.
Yeah, but there's a pretty grim detail about what happened next, right?
Yeah, there is. Tobin brought the heads of Felipe and Jose back to Fort Garland
Oh my God.
as proof of their deaths
Wow.
and to collect the bounty.
Wow, that's intense.
It's a stark reminder of how violent things were back then.
Yeah, and how determined people were to bring criminals to justice.
Exactly.
Even if it meant doing some pretty brutal things.
Yeah, it was a different time.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure.
So Felipe Espinosa's story might not be a household name today,
Right.
but it was clearly a big deal back then.
It was.
And people are still thinking about it even now.
Yeah, there's actually a book about him called The Vendetta of Felipe Espinosa that came out in 2014.
Wow.
So people are still interested in these dark chapters
Yeah.
of American history.
Yeah. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
What are the key takeaways that you listening should remember from this deep dive into Felipe Espinosa's story?
Well, we've looked at the life and actions of Felipe Espinosa,
Mm.
who, along with his brother and then later his nephew, carried out these brutal killings in 1863.
Right.
And it seems like the reasons behind it all go back to the loss of land and this deep sense of injustice that came after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo.
Yeah.
And then there's that unverified story about the vision he had,
Right.
which adds another layer of complexity.
It does.
The scale of the violence is shocking.
Yeah.
That letter he sent to the governor is almost unbelievable.
Yeah, it's really something.
And then you have this almost larger-than-life figure of Tom Tobin,
Right.
the legendary tracker
Yep.
who finally put an end to the terror.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story
It is.
and a little bit unsettling.
Yeah.
So for you listening, think about this.
Yeah.
The historical context, the displacement of Hispanic populations after the Mexican-American War, the lawlessness of the frontier, and then all these different interpretations of Felipe Espinosa's motivations.
Right.
What does his story tell us about the American West? All the complexities and the tensions that shaped that era.
It's a great question to think about.
Yeah. And are there other stories like this, ones that are hidden or contested, waiting to be uncovered?
Yeah, because history is rarely simple,
Yeah.
and it often involves uncomfortable truths
Mm-hmm.
that we need to pay attention to.
Yeah. Well said. I think we've given everyone a lot to think about today.
I hope so.
This has been a really interesting deep dive.
It has.
And I hope everyone listening will continue to explore these fascinating stories.
Me too.
Until next time, thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Yeah.